Can UK be Saudi Arabia of wind? The idea here is that UK should exploit a natural resource that it has in abundance, as Saudi Arabia has oil, and become a rich country. We're having conversations like this recently with greater urgency due to the very great threat of climate change, caused largely by modern-era exhumation of fossil carbon resources and of international, let's call them, upsets of supply. The abundant UK resources on which Boris staked his sheikdom is, of course, wind power. Labour and the Green Party both promised before the 2024 general election to quadruple the then current 20 gigawatt-ish of wind power with the remarkably prominent clean label. Clean is a red herring as far as climate change goes. The urgent necessity is to reduce and ultimately reverse human-caused additions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. I wish they'd call it something like sustainable instead. I like to use the website at gridwatch.co.uk to view the state of the UK electricity grid. I think the colours appeal to me. I made the original video about a year ago, on a sunny, almost windless May day. The previous day was no windier, it had even less sun. The month charts show previous windy periods. 2025 didn't seem like a very windy year to start. Just eyeballing the year charts, 2024 seems to have more pale blue on it. What is obvious to anyone who dries laundry outside or fixes fences or roofs or who sails is that UK wind is episodic. Sometimes there's a lot, sometimes for a long time, sometimes there's hardly any for ages, and other times the wind comes and goes capriciously, able to be both still as the grave and bowling people over on the same day. Energy websites, which invariably show energy only in the form of electricity because it's somewhat simpler to measure and there's very little storage of any kind, show delivered energy. That is, energy which met a concurrent energy consumption demand. More energy could potentially be generated, but with no demand and nearly zero storage, there would be nowhere for it to go. Electrical energy supply is largely determined by consumption. Variable renewable energy, which isn't under any kind of human control such as wind power, must be matched to demand, so if there's more wind than needed, we reject the extra harvest and call this curtailment. Curtailment is the way wind power works on the UK electricity grid, so there are websites for that too. This Sunday morning had reasonable wind of 7 to 8 gigawatts, of which a little was curtailed as presumably not much was going on in the UK and it was a nice sunny day. Some curtailment is due to grid bottlenecks, limiting the amount of power that can be transferred from, for example, the big Scottish wind farms and England. But if there's no demand, or something else is satisfying the demand, it can't be transferred anyway and must be curtailed. Solar energy, so far as I know, can't be explicitly curtailed. On-grid inverters will export as long as their exports don't cause the AC waveform on their local part of the electricity grid to go out of bounds. That windy episode at the start of May appears in the curtailment chart as an expensive spike, the lion's share of May's £18 million curtailment payments total. Wind farms know what they could produce, their potential, but they can't send to the grid more than is demanded. Curtailment requires that they turn down their output. The energy from a wind farm is essentially free when the wind blows, so curtailment rejects the benefit of that free energy while also compensating the wind farm for not generating when it could. It's like an energy tariff that gives you free energy at weekends, but you go out at weekends and turn everything off at home. Curtailment involves considerable lost potential and largish sums of money. £358 million in the first few months of 2025 was spent rejecting wind energy, while we also paid for other forms of energy that can be bottomlessly utilised on demand, such as imported fossil natural gas and imported biomass. To put the largish sounding sums of money into comparison, the total amount of curtailed wind energy up to mid-2025 was only about 5% of annual electricity consumption. Electricity consumption in the UK is about 20% of all kinds energy consumption, which includes stuff like industrial mains gas consumption and transport fuels, so we really chucked away about 1% of 1 year's energy. These figures aren't all energy we couldn't use. Some of it is energy that couldn't be transmitted to where it was needed due to insufficiency of electricity grid capacity. One of the consequences of building the UK on fossil fuels is that major consumption regions such as the south of England are now distant from where the energy is generated on the UK's north and east coasts. Lots of work is going on to increase capacity. What would happen if we increase wind power generation capacity in the UK? We know how much energy in the form of electricity we use. That can't currently be commanded or dispatched to any degree. How much of the extra wind would we use, and how much would be excess? What we need is GridWatch, but with fantasy wind added. I can get my own copy of the GridWatch webpage we're looking at with Save Page As from the context menu. The page and all its resources are now on the local storage device. What I plan to do is to serve the content locally on my own PC, pretending to be GridWatch, but with some tweaks so I can use the same data and presentation to show different amounts of wind power. I quite like to use the Java programming language for as much as possible, perhaps more than I should. It's just what I'm most familiar with for this kind of task. There are plenty of open source tools. I like to use the Eclipse IDE, Integrated Development Environment. It's better than ever every time I download it. With a little bit of hacking of those local GridWatch files and a line in my PC's etc hosts file, I can now request not.gridwatch.localhost from my own PC running on port 8080 because I'm running the program as an unprivileged user. Nobody else can see this, it's on my PC only. I've added a little form so I can magically multiply the amount of wind power in the data. The magnified wind data is used to first remove coal-powered electricity generation, as there was still some coal power in this old data, and then to reduce gas down to a nominal 3 gigawatt idle. Any remaining magnified wind is recorded as overgen, which we'd normally curtail. At 1.5 times, overgen is visible on the charts as dark green ears in windy episodes and shown in the tooltip. Note that because this data presents only energy that was transferred from generators to consumers, the actual generation potential, what could have been generated, is probably always slightly and sometimes much higher. Some generation sources, like hydro and gas, can be turned down when they're not needed at full power, and wind is curtailed if there's more available than required to satisfy demand. The windy episode at the start of May, if multiplied by 1.5 times, would have required further curtailment by the amount shown in overgen if the unmagnified amount was the full potential generation in reality. In reality, this data excludes curtailed wind, so overgen probably underestimates the actual additional potential from the magnified capacity. Even windier April shows better dark green ears of overgen. Also apparent is the 3 gigawatt minimum I set in code for gas generation. Idling gas power stations may also be providing grid quality assurance, assuring wave shape of the alternating current sinusoid just by being massive rotating machines. Bumping up the wand power to 2 times still doesn't make much difference for the latest 2 calm days. Early May's overgen ears are a little taller. Overgen is quite a bit more obvious in the longer charts. 10 plus gigawatts is substantially more than UK's current plan for increased transmission capacity of 4 to 8 gigawatts. The very important point here is that 2 times capacity doesn't result in only 2 times curtailment. In good wind, not only will the older capacity be in excess, but since demand is already met, the entirety of the newly added capacity is in excess and must, in the absence of a plan to consume it, be curtailed. Let's keep going with increments of wand power. We're not interested so much in curtailment overgen for this presentation, just in the effect on the UK's energy mix. As you might expect, the episodes of idling gas become more numerous and longer, but the mountainous appearance of the gas chart confirms we still need it at 2 times. Let's try 3 times. At 3 times, a new issue is made obvious in the today chart. 3 times not much wind is still not that much, but it was quite a sunny day. There's so much solar production that there isn't always enough demand headroom between idling gas, always present biomass, nuclear, and abundant solar production to use all the wind that can be produced with 3 times wand power. There was sufficient demand earlier in the day before solar was available for gas to be needed. 3 times wand power means there's a lot more blue in the energy charts for the increased wind in the energy mix. Overgen peaks are now exceeding the power axis marks. This is a lot of energy that our current plan obliges us to both reject and pay for. There's still plenty of sizable light brown peaks of gas power stations though. 3 times wind doesn't seem to be enough. Let's try 4 times. Even at 4 times, the full instalment of what is currently promised, a day like 9th May last year would still need gas to be burned in power stations. See the hump between about 6 AM and 8 AM before the sun was high in the sky. Even 4 times not much wind is still not a lot of wind. The good harvest of sun on that day means there's some overgen from the extra wind capacity around lunchtime. There is plenty more blue in all the charts, and the dark green of overgen is observably off the charts. The clipping doesn't mean anything. I've hit the presentational limits of the GridWatch page's code. The important thing to observe is that even 4 times wind hasn't made the light brown peaks of gas-fired generation disappear. Some of them are still substantially tall and wide. These peaks represent humongous amounts of energy for which we still do not have alternative generation. Thanks for staying to the bitter end. I hope the voiceover has been more useful and less annoying to you than the original posting's soundtrack. There's no new information, sorry. I'm just hoping to catch a few people who will bail out a bit later and hopefully feel like they can see the ideas the data convey to me. It should be obvious that 4 times wind power, or about 80 gigawatts of capacity, isn't enough to run the UK on, and also perhaps that it's not really a problem of generation capacity. We could keep adding capacity. UK's offshore wind potential, if we wanted to install it all, is said to be around 2,000 gigawatts, while the government says our current all-kinds energy consumption averages about 200 gigawatts. Those peaks of overgen look like they could fill in the gaps where we currently burn gas. But we don't have the means to shift generation in time to satisfy demand. Or do we? I must redo the second video. See you later, hopefully.